Hello, everybody. We're going to talk about China's one child policy. The aim of this lesson is to be able to explain the problems this policy brought about. So, let's start. Let us remember the timeline of the one child policy. In 1950, the Chinese had a large population growth. The government's idea was that the more people there are, the stronger they are. However, in 1962, there was a large famine that killed around 30 million people. By the 1970s, many countries started worrying about their population growth, including China. Now let's look at some of the problems that this policy created. One of the largest problems of the one child policy was this. Since the policy stated that you could only have one child, many women were forced to have abortions, even as late as the ninth month of pregnancy. In Chinese culture, the family's lineage and their property go through the male child. So many families believed that if they had a girl, the family line would stop. This made many women who were pregnant and realized that they were going to have a girl have an abortion, hoping that eventually they would have a boy. Women were placed under tremendous pressure from the government. If they got pregnant with their second child, they were forced to have an abortion and they were sterilized. A journalist and filmmaker spoke to a midwife that delivered babies through the one child policy. She asked her if she remembers how many babies she delivered throughout her career. The only thing she said was that she doesn't remember the number of deliveries, but she did remember that she did 60,000 abortions during her career as a midwife. Many of these abortions were forced, and the woman was not happy about it. Women pregnant with their second child would try and hide their pregnancy from officials. Eventually, late in the pregnancy, they might be found out and they were forced to have an abortion. Local officials and the central government had power over people's private lives. Couples didn't have a choice of how many children they can have, since they could only have one. If they had a second child, women were sterilized, which meant they could no longer have children. If they didn't want to do this and they went into hiding, officials would come over to their house and sometimes break it down and arrest family members. There were people in smaller villages who used to notice which women were pregnant. If they realized that they were pregnant for the second time, they would tell an official. The government official would then come to the woman and ask her to pay a fine. If she didn't want to pay this fine to keep the second child, they would take possessions, such as the television, or even a pig if you are a farmer. And if the family was really poor, could even take cloth and even grain, so that your family didn't have anything to eat. If you wanted to keep your second child, but couldn't or didn't want to pay the fine, and you worked with the government, they would fire you. As we have said, Chinese society had a preference for sons over daughters, and this resulted in female infanticide. This is when girls are killed. During this time, many girls were also born, and since the parents would have preferred a boy, they might have either taken the child to an orphanage, or they might have left the child in the middle of the road to die. They did all of this hoping that they would get pregnant with another child that would be a boy, and could continue the family name. These are some of the girls that were abandoned due to the one-child policy. Child trafficking also increased during the time of the policy. Since many girls were left in orphanages, the orphanages used to sell these girls for money. If the girls were older, they used to also sell them as brides so that they could be married off. This is a photo of some of the children that were missing. Since in Chinese culture, families favored men over women, and as we have said, many of the girls that were born were either aborted or sent for adoption. This meant that there were many more men than there were women. Let's look at a graph showing the amount of women in orange and the amount of men in blue. So you can see that there are quite a few men than there are women, although it looks like a small gap. In 2011, this gap was around 34 million women. This means that if all the men and women had to be paired up, there would be 34 million men that would not find a bride. This became quite a large problem. There were villages in the countryside where the woman would migrate to the city to work there. The woman had a better lifestyle in the city and was able to find a richer man. On the other hand, the men left in the rural villages remained without a bride. For many mothers, it was important that their son would get married and give them children eventually. But with such a discrepancy between the amount of men and women, there was not enough women to go around. These towns started to be called bachelor towns. Towns where there weren't any women to be married. Studies have also shown that all these men that can't find a wife lead to more crime and sexual violence. As we said before, women would have been kidnapped and sold to men to be married. During the one child policy, couples were only allowed to have one child. This means that they poured all of their effort, energy, and finances into this one child. This was done so that when the child becomes an adult, he or she would be able to take care of his parents. If the parents abided by the one child policy and only had one child, they were able to get into the best schools, wear the best clothes, and eat all of the best foods. All this attention of the parents and the grandparents on this one child created a generation of pampered and entitled children. They called them little emperors. As these children were the only children being given attention in their family, it felt like they were the center of the universe. The children were spoiled rotten and given anything they wanted. They expect that everyone will be protective of them. Since these children were fed well, it also created a number of very obese children, and later on adults. Remember that the children that were born during the first year of the one child policy are now, in 2020, 40 years old. Since there was only one child that the parents could give attention to, all the pressure on these children born during the one child policy led to very high suicide rates. As the children grew into adults, they realized that they had too much pressure and they had to take care of both their parents and four of their grandparents just by themselves. As this one child had to take care of six people, there was an increasing pressure on the children that were born during the one child policy. Since there were less children being born, as these children grew, there were less people of working age. Sometimes this is called the 4-2-1 problem. There are four grandparents, two adults, and one child. The one child who grows into working age needs to take care of both his parents and his four grandparents. The final check. Below are three positive effects of the one-child policy. Think of the negative effects around the facts that there are below. The three effects you see are positive, but there's also a negative, these effects. So, pause the video and allow yourself 2 minutes to work them out. When you're done, press play and check your answers. Okay, so the first one, families could only have one child. They were happy if the child was a boy, but if the child was a girl, the mother would have had an abortion or given her up for adoption. Second statement, parents put pressure on their one child and made sure that they were well educated. That's a positive. But all the pressure increased the suicide rates. Third statement, parents who abided with the policy received financial help. They received many benefits, and that was a positive effect. But parents who disobeyed the policy were fined, and sometimes even property was taken away from them. Okay, remember, geography is everywhere.